Now, my guest, I spoke with him yesterday because I just love watching him on social media. He is our very own NHS hero. He's an NHS GP, an urgent care doctor. His name is Dr. Koyes Ahmed. He's here with me to talk about his experiences, especially during the pandemic. And I thought it would be great to have him on the show, also to just give some advice and I guess to talk about what's been going on. So welcome, Dr. Koyes. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you?
Thanks for having me on the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being on the show. I know that you're a very, very busy person. I literally watch you, online, giving advice to people. And it's just wonderful to watch that you're helping the community in such a way, not just the Bengali community, but the wider community. Dr. Koyes, I guess I wanted to speak to you because we've obviously been under strict lockdown. The restrictions are easing, and I guess, for me, what I've seen in America, for example, where they've been doing it a little bit longer, the cases have spiked, and especially in Florida, Texas, and Arizona. And I guess my fear is, well, we're going to that stage where we're going to be easing these restrictions as well, and what is going to happen. So I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, really.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a really difficult situation, isn't it, to think about, because we've been in this lockdown period for quite a while now, for 3 months plus, and initially, everyone's done an amazing job in adhering to the advice and sticking to the guidelines as best as they can do. But understandably, people have become a bit frustrated, finding it difficult. It's maybe affected their mental health. And sadly, that may have impacted on what they've been doing in recent times. Not everyone, but a few people may have kind of eased the restrictions themselves before they were formally eased. And sadly, we have seen a few spikes in cases. And it's interesting you just mentioned that, because I've just heard, literally in the last 15 minutes or so, that there may be a localized lockdown in certain places like Leicester, for example, where they had a spike in cases. Wow. And if you look around the world, the US, they've had to lock down certain states where they were trying to reopen them, like Texas and Florida, because of huge numbers of increases in cases. Places like Germany have had increases. So there's various countries that have been affected after easing their restrictions. And, inshallah, this won't happen to us, but we have to be really careful. We still have to stick to the advice. Yeah,
no, of course. In the UK, we've had over 310,000 cases and 43,000 deaths. These are huge numbers. And I guess, what advice would you give people that are having to go back into work? I know that, friends of mine and myself, we will be going back in a few months. And one of the great things, what I've noticed is some organisations, they've taken some extra care. They've looked at how people should be introduced back into work, but not every organisation is going to have the ability to do that. So what advice would you give people?
So I think first and foremost is to follow the government advice, the official government advice on gov.uk, also to look at the NHS websites and follow other official sources, reputable sources. And if you're interested, there are lots of other good sources online as well, from reputable organisations, and hopefully individuals like myself who can relay some of that information. And I think the key things are really pretty much what we're doing already, making sure that we socially distance at least 1 metre plus. So initially it was 2 metres. They're thinking of relaxing, or they are planning to relax it down to 1 metre plus. And what that means is, you can stay at least 1 metre away, but have additional measures like not facing each other too often, wearing masks. So that's another thing, wearing masks in appropriate places. Wearing gloves if it's appropriate. You don't need to necessarily wear gloves all the time. Or when you're going out shopping, there's not always a huge amount of evidence for that. But making sure, and this is really important, we all know this, to wash our hands regularly with soap and water or hand wash and water. Hand sanitizer is good, but soap and water, the most effective things in killing off the virus and clearing the virus. So, all those things that we're already doing, socially distancing, washing our hands, making sure that we adhere to all the other measures, not touching our face too often, sneezing or coughing into an elbow or a tissue, all those things, we should carry on doing so and just be extra cautious.
Yeah. One of the great things about you is that you've done some work for a facility community, right? You did a video of giving advice, but in speaking in facility. What made you think of that?
Yeah. So on my social media, on my Instagram at Dr. Koyes, on my Facebook, LinkedIn, I've done various videos. I've done a few videos in Sylheti because I know that Bengali people, especially, and BAME community individuals are disproportionately affected. And we all know that. There's been a few papers that have been published on that. And I thought because of the fact that often the information that we get given doesn't relay back to our parents or the elders or those who don't speak English as a first language, why don't we create some videos? And I'm part of an organisation, I'm an executive committee member of an organisation called Bristol Muslim Strategic Leadership Group. So we did videos in 8 different languages, including Bengali and Urdu and Hindi and Polish and Turkish, because we want to get that information to everyone, especially those who are most vulnerable.
Yeah. Why don't we just watch a little clip of that? Because I thought it was wonderful what you did. Let's just have a little watch.
মানুষ হন পারা আরো যাইতে পারবা কিন্তু নিয়ম মানিয়া চলা লাগবো আপনার নিজ ঘরের মানুষের সাথে পার্কও যাইতে পারবা পিকনিক করতে পারবা খেলাধুলা করতে পারবা অন্য কোনো একজন মানুষের সাথে দেখা করতে পারবা কোনো পাবলিক জায়গাত কিন্তু 2 মিটার দূর থাকা লাগবো আস্তা ফ্যামিলির সাথে নাই খালি আপনি একলা একজন আরেকজনের লগে দেখা করতে পারবা আর গরুর ভিতরে নাই পাবলিক পাড়া জায়গাত হলিডে যাওয়া আপনার আর করে থাকলে ও করে যাওয়া নিষেধ আপনি যে করে আসেন ওগুলো থাকা অন্য মানুষও করে যাইতে না কিন্তু কেউ যদি সাহায্য করা লাগে ধরে লাউকা যারা আর কেউ নাই অথবা যারা হেল্প পালা নাই তারা আপনি সাহায্য করতে পারবা তারা যদি কোনো শপিং করিয়া দিতা ঠিক আছে কিন্তু আপনার ঠিক মতো দেওয়া লাগবো করে হামাইতে আর বাড়াইতে
So since that, obviously, there has been some ease in the restrictions. But I thought, just listening to you, you've got such a soothing voice. And I was just like thinking that you would actually calm people down. You won't let people panic just by listening to that. So well done on that. I thought that's fantastic. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is the BAME community, okay, has had a major impact when it comes to the virus. Why, out of the BAME community, it's been said that the Bangladeshi community has been affected the most. So, in your view, why is that?
Yeah, so there have been a number of papers published publicly, including from the IFS Institute of Fiscal Studies, the Office for National Statistics, and more recently Public Health England. And essentially, they all came to the same conclusion that BAME community individuals are disproportionately affected. And the last one, the Public Health England paper, showed that Bangladeshi people are twice as likely to die as those who are white British from coronavirus. And there's so many different reasons why that could be. So number one, it could be because of poverty and deprivation. And we have to realize that all of these reasons won't apply to everyone, but they're generalized reasons. So poverty and deprivation, overcrowding. So statistically, 30% of UK British Bangladeshi households are overcrowded compared to 2% of the white British community. So that's a big difference. Then there's things like underlying medical health problems. We all know that, unfortunately, South Asian individuals are more susceptible to things like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. Then other conditions like vitamin D deficiency may play a factor, obesity, and then there's also other things like professions. So if you're working in a higher risk profession, like being a taxi driver, a security guard, or the NHS, you're more at risk of having the disease or contracting the disease. So there's various risk factors involved there. And that's just a few of them. But we're not entirely sure clearly for everyone, and it won't affect everyone individually with each risk factor. But yeah, we are unfortunately at high risk.
And I think it's quite interesting what you've just said there. I mean, it sounds like like you mentioned, there's a number of reasons, be it financial, socioeconomic, health, and so on. What are the things that we can do as a community right now that can make us more healthier and help us fight this more?
So there's a lot of lifestyle factors that we have to consider here. So things like obesity, underlying medical problems are often linked to diet and lifestyle. So things like diabetes, for example. So if we can improve our diet, if we could exercise more, if we could cut down on smoking, cut down on the guan, fun, unfortunately, and all those other risk factors, then that would essentially that'll contribute to our health, improve our health, and then as a result of that, hopefully we'd reduce the risk of having things like coronavirus or other conditions. But although it's not a lifestyle disease as such, it's a virus. However, there are lifestyle factors that are contributing to the risk. So, all the things we mentioned, exercise, diet, eating well, sleeping well, all those things will make a big difference overall to our health.
But out of the South Asian communities, we are at risk the most. And, my understanding is that people still do live in multi-generational households in other communities. But why the Bangladeshi community has been singled out?
I think you're right about multi-generational households definitely being a risk factor. And in fact, even if I look at my own household, my parents live with myself and my wife and our children. So it is a risk factor. And I think perhaps that's because it's a bit more common in certain ethnic groups like us or the Pakistani populations and other ethnic groups. But I think it's a culmination of risk factors rather than one individual risk factor. So if you take into account the multi-generational households, plus the underlying risk, the underlying conditions, plus the poverty and deprivation, plus the occupational risk factors, all of them combined, I think, contributes to the overall risk, not just one single risk factor often.
I wanted to also pick your brain on something, okay? So in Bangladesh, obviously there's 164 million in regards to population. There's been 137,000 cases and only 1,738 deaths have been reported. In the last 2 months, it went from 8,000 cases up to 137,000 cases. There seems to be some disparity. If you look at the kind of cases in the UK and China, why are the numbers so low in Bangladesh?
Yeah, so I think unfortunately there's a lot of factors that we have to consider here. So number one is lack of access to healthcare, not just with coronavirus, but generally speaking. So you can imagine in Bangladesh, a lot of people live in rural areas. They struggle to find healthcare when they really need it for other conditions, whether it's a heart attack or a stroke, for example. So to get a coronavirus test is probably going to be quite low down on the list. So access to healthcare is quite difficult, generally in a lot of countries like Bangladesh. Also, when you actually do access healthcare, is whether or not you have the resources there. So things like testing available, appropriate testing. And even when testing is available, unfortunately, having spoken to a few other doctors, it's whether or not it's accurately done and accurately portrayed and the results are actually given as they should be, because that may be a risk factor. I'm not saying that definitely is, but I've heard from other doctors that sometimes that can be a potential risk factor where the results aren't accurately given out. So many different things. So I think we should always bear these numbers with a pinch of salt. They're not the true reflection of how things are, whether it's in Bangladesh or in this country.
And what advice would you give? I know that obviously there are children that have gone back to school, and there are parents that are cautious and are scared. And, like you were talking about, we do live in multi-generational households. There is a risk, right? There is a risk of children going back to school. What would you say to the parents of those that are just slightly cautious and slightly worried?
Sure. So first of all, we have to understand that the majority of people who do get coronavirus have very minimal and mild symptoms. So most people will be very fine and well and will have a mild cold-like illness. Obviously, there are people that won't be unfortunately that well and may sadly die as a result and may be in hospital on a ventilator. So there's two extremes, but the majority of people will be well. Children, it doesn't tend to affect, generally speaking, as severely as it would adults who are vulnerable. So that's one thing we have to think about. So children tend to be less affected. Unfortunately, there have been incidents where children have been seriously affected, including the 13-day-old baby who sadly passed away with coronavirus. But with the parents and the school's decision, that's a very personal decision based on their individual circumstances. Some parents have no choice. I mean, me personally, I'm not sending my eldest, who's of school age, to school yet, but that's my personal decision. But you have to take into account your own circumstances and the risks to yourself and your family and those who you may be living with. So with us, if my parents live with me, you're right, my daughter might bring in the virus back into the house and she could spread it to my parents. That could be disastrous. Whereas I could even transmit it through her to her school because of the job I do. So we have to take into account everything. But personally speaking, I think it may have been a bit too early to open up the schools. But hopefully, inshallah, in the future, it won't have a big impact negatively.
And what's your view in that very soon we'll have restaurants opening and things like that? What's your view on that?
Personal opinions don't reflect who I work for or anything else. But I think it's probably a bit too early. I think it's happening a bit too quickly because the case numbers, there's still at least 100 plus people dying on a lot of days. And if we look back on the Friday and Thursday this week just gone, there were actually more deaths on the Friday and Thursday this week than there were the previous Friday and Thursday. Having said that, again, those figures, you just can't base it on those figures. And case numbers themselves are going down. I think we should probably wait a bit longer myself, although I understand there's a business and economic impact that we have to take into consideration as well. So it's not just about the health thing. So, I'm not in that position to make those decisions, probably a good thing, but I think it's probably a bit too early.
So before we finish, because we're running out of time, if you could give just a quick fire of your advice to people to keep safe, what would they be?
Okay, so first and foremost, please, please, please stick to the rules. Please listen to the guidelines that have been set by the government. Please wash your hands regularly. Please keep that social distancing and practice that effectively. Please stay at home whenever you can. And please make sure that you don't break those rules. Don't mix with lots of other people. Don't go to these street parties and all these other things. Because coronavirus is still out there. It's still affecting people. It's still killing people out there. So please, please listen to the guidelines and the advice that's been given.
Thank you, Dr. Koyes Ahmed. Genuinely, I watch you and I'm in awe, and I think you do a wonderful job. And thank you for keeping us all safe.